Good morning to all. Welcome you all to the day 2 of third panel discussion on the conference titled Tibet-Mongol Relations, Prospects and Challenges in Tibet-Mongol Relations since the 20th Century and the Path Forward. On this panel, we have 3 esteemed speakers, Professor Batbayar Tsedendamba, Dr. Lkhagyademchig Jadamba, and Professor Batbayar Tenzin. I am Tenzin Lhadon. I'll be chairing this session today. My role as a chair is to make sure that the speakers do not exceed the time limit. So I will be giving you a small piece of paper to indicate you have left 2 or 3 minutes to conclude. So since we make it clear, let's move on to our first speaker. Let me welcome Professor Batbayar Tsedendamba, who is a principal researcher at the Institute of History and Ethnology at Mongolian Academy of Science. For detailed bio, please refer to the pamphlets that we have distributed. He will be speaking on the presentation titled Mongolian People's Government Steps to Establish Official Relations with Tibet, to Gombo-Idshin and his mission to Tibet. Professor, please, the stage is yours.
Okay, good morning, everybody. So I am pleased to do my presentations this morning, especially when we have such a beautiful lady chair. So my paper will give you a brief introduction to the mission of Duke Gombo-Idshin, who was appointed as ambassador, plenipotentiary ambassador of Mongolia to Tibet in 1926. And his mission lasted almost 1 year and a half. His mission reached Lhasa, and Duke Gombo-Idshin and his delegation met 13th Dalai Lama and ministers of Tibet government, had very good meetings and discussions in Lhasa. So this paper is designed to show you that Mongolian government consistently tried to reach the 13th Dalai Lama in Lhasa to establish official relations and to exchange ambassadors. So you know that yesterday we discussed about issues in the beginning of 20th century, especially 1911 when Mongolia declared its independence from Manchu Qin dynasty, in 1913 when Dalai Lama declared its independence of Tibet. But today I will talk about 1920s. You must remember that in Mongolia there was a people's revolution with the support of Soviet Russia in 1921. And the people's government was established in 1921 in Mongolia. With the help of Soviet Russia, it means that with the help of Soviet Communist Party and Russian Bolsheviks. But in this people's government for the first 4 years were like a constitutional monarchy. The head of Mongolian religious head was Jadamba until he passed away in 1924, May 1924. So people's government had some huge respect towards Jadamba. Why? Because he was so popular in Mongolia, still in 1920s. So everyone worshipped him Jadamba Hotokto. So people's government, even the Soviet Russian Bolsheviks, they thought that it's better to have Jadamba Hotokto as a religious leader. But people's government did some kind of written agreement with Hotokto, Jadamba Hotokto, that you will be only a religious leader. You will not intervene to the state affairs. So this state of affairs of constitutional monarchy lasted for 4 years until 1924, when Jadamba Hotokto passed away in May. So in November same year, people's government convened first state Great Hural and declared its constitution, and Mongolia moved from constitutional monarchy to republican governance. So during that time, the Mongolian People's Government still tried to establish official relations with Tibet. And the first official letter was sent in October 1922. So first slide, you can see that this official letter was sent to Lhasa, Tibet, with humble Lama Yonzung Hamba, who was Tibetan, very high-ranking Lama residing in Gandan Monastery together with Jadamba Hotokto. This first official letter was signed by Tsedendamba, Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs. And as I said, the letter was taken by Yonzung Hamba, Yonzung Abbot Lkhagyademchig, who was going to Lhasa on leave. So yesterday, Ambassador Bolt talked about the biography of Yonzung Hamba Lkhagyademchig. So I will not repeat this. So, but the background of this official letter and official mission of Duke Gombo-Idshin was that the Soviet government, especially Mr. Chicherin, who was the People's Commissar for Foreign Affairs of Soviet Russia, he wanted to send this official delegation to Tibet, Lhasa, but he wanted to make sure that the Russian people, Kalmyk people, will be also among the delegation and go together with Mongolian official delegation, some Kalmyk Soviet Bolshevik people, try to find out the situation in Lhasa, in Tibet, and how can Soviet Russia set up a mission in Lhasa too. So Soviet Ambassador Nikiforov, who arrived to Mongolia in autumn of 1925, he did some preparation for the mission of joint Mongolia-Soviet mission to Tibet. At that time also, Agvan Dorjiev, yesterday we talked a lot about him, Buryat Tsanshev Lama. Agvan Dorjiev was very active. He proposed an idea to establish postal service, communication service between Nisil-Hure, Mongolian capital city, and Tibetan capital city, Lhasa. So Agvan Dorjiev proposed that there were three options for the postal route between Mongolia and Tibet. And one route which goes from Nisl-Hure through the Tsedendamba and reaching Nakcho, Lhasa. This route was chosen, and if people go by horse, it will take 46 days. So on 2 ways, 92 days will need to reach Lhasa and go back. So the Soviet government suggested that the cost, total cost of these postal stations between Mongolia and Tibet will require 9,000 Russian rubles, and the cost will be divided by three parties: Mongolian government, Soviet government, and Tibet government. But unfortunately, of course, this project was not realized. But the Soviet government was very consistent to sending mission to Lhasa, and now we can see on next slide, next. Here. Now you can see the protocol of meeting Communist Party of Soviet Union about the mission, joint Mongolia-Soviet mission to Lhasa. And People's Commissar Chicherin made a report to Politburo meeting of Soviet Communist Party, and the highest body of Soviet Communist Party approved this mission and allocated 20,000 rubles. So it meant that half of the cost will be borne by Mongolian government, and the first half by Soviet government. So we can see the sign of Stalin, who was at that time secretary of the Soviet Communist Party. Next one, please. So in January 1926, the Mongolian government prepared a very important document called Instructions for Mongolian ambassador to Tibet. So in this document, which is now in archive of Mongolian Foreign Ministry, we can find that the mission had several purposes. Of course, first purpose was to recognize each other's governments. So Tibetan government will recognize Mongolian government, Mongolian government will recognize Tibet government. And second point was exchange of plenipotentiary representatives. So in today's words, exchange of ambassadors. And also the important point was to make safe travel between Tibet and Mongolia. So private people, official people, and merchants for trade could travel between Mongolia and Tibet with guarantees that this travel will be safe. Next, please. So here also we can see the letter of credentials which was given to Ambassador Gombo-Idshin. by Mongolian government. That this letter of credence certifies that the Gombo-Idshin is a plenipotentiary representative or ambassador of Mongolia, entitled to discuss any issues with Tibetan government and establish a treaty between Tibet and Mongolia. Next, please. So the mission was consisted from 16 persons. As you can see, the ambassador Gombo-Idshin. Then the second person was counselor. The second person was from Kalmyk, from Soviet Union. Chapchayev, who was a Soviet citizen. The secretary was Mr. Amgalan, who is Mongolian. But translator was Bembayev, who's also Kalmyk. So among the 16 people, 4 people were from Soviet Union. One counselor, then translator Bembayev, then one driver Lundukov, and also interpreter from Tibetan language, Jigmit Dorj, who was also a Soviet citizen. Please, next. So the budget was calculated for this embassy by Mongolian government with very much detail. So all expenses were written, and the Mongolian government paid a lot of attention to make sure that the delegation had enough money to go to Lhasa, to Tibet. Next, please. So, but the official, of course, official purpose of this mission was to reach Lhasa, to meet Dalai Lama, and to establish a treaty with Tibet government. But in order to make safe the journey, it was very dangerous journey through the Chinese territory to Tibet. So the people's government did issue a letter that this mission was to pay religious visit to Lhasa, to monasteries of Tibet, in order to make farewell services for 8 Jadamba Hotokto. You remember that 8 Jadamba Hotokto passed away in May 1924. So it was 2 years after the passing away Jadamba. That's why people's government made this kind of explanation that this delegation will go to pay homage to Tibetan monasteries, to do farewell service to 8 Jadamba. So Mongolian delegation left Ulaanbaatar in September 1926. So we have a record, a memoir written by secretary of this mission, Mr. Amgalan, who wrote how was departure arranged and how they traveled through Alsha and Tsaidam. So this trip was very hard trip by horse or camel, and you know that it was 1926, so this was a very dangerous, very hard trip. But they, fortunately, they arrived to Huknor, Tibet-Mongol, and the people of Tibet-Mongol helped a lot, the mission delegation, and they could safely pass the Tibet-Mongol. So now, here you can see the report by Ambassador Gombo-Idshin. So as I said, they spent 7 months to reach Lhasa. And they spent also 7 or 8 months in Lhasa. And then went back, also spent 7 or 8 months. So altogether, two years, yeah, almost 2 years. And they reached back by summer of 1928 to Mongolia, came back. So the Duke Gombo-Idshin wrote the official report to Mongolian government. So I discovered this official report to Mongolian government, and now you can see the English translation. But here you can see the photo of the head of delegation, Duke Gombo-Idshin, here sitting. And he is Lkhagyademchig, who was counselor to the mission. And this is Russian Bolshevik. And these two people also members of delegation. So Duke Gombo-Idshin was the main person, then Chapchayev was assistant as a Soviet Bolshevik. But in Mongolian archive, we cannot find the records of negotiations between Mongolian ambassador and Tibet government. But we know that they had a number of meetings, official and unofficial meetings with Tibetan government. And somehow happened that, please go to conclusion, that Tibetan government did not give official answer that they will conclude treaty and exchange ambassadors. The Tibetan government gave a very polite answer, but very vague and not very clear. So its conclusion, I think, why Tibetan government did such a position? Why did Tibetan government agree to establish treaty with Mongolian government and exchange ambassadors? Because Tibetan government, I think, had some information, because Tibet still had unofficial mission in capital of Mongolia. Many Tibetans were still in Ikhure. So I think they had information what is happening exactly in Mongolia. So Bolsheviks came to power, Red Russians and Red Mongols, and they captured the government. And what they are doing, they doing anti-religious campaign. Yeah, it was start of anti-religious campaign, and there was persecution of some Tibetan lamas, Saj Lama and others who were inner circle of 8 Jadamba Hotukto. So I think that this information came to Lhasa before this mission. So that's why I think the Tibetan government was very cautious. And also they know that some members of delegation are not Mongol, they're Soviet Bolshevik. So that's why I think they had some problem with this mission, and unfortunately this mission could not reach the main purpose. Main purpose was to establish official treaty between Mongolian government, Tibet government, and to decide to exchange official ambassadors between two governments. So this purpose was not reached, but the mission was done, and Duke Gombo-Idshin reported to the government, and the people's government was satisfied. That also they paid visit to Dalai Lama and to some big monasteries of Tibet, and also had ordered some farewell services for 8 Jadamba Hotukto. So I think this was the first official mission attempt by new Mongolian government after 1921 to reach Tibet, to reach Lhasa, and to seek official relations with Dalai Lama government. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor, for that insightful presentation. Moving on to our second speaker, let me welcome Dr. Lkhagyademchig Jadamba, who is a faculty member at the Anthropology and Archaeology Department at the National University of Mongolia. He will be speaking on significance of His Holiness the Dalai Lama's visit to Mongolia in 1979 and 2016.
Dear distinguished scholars and honorable participants of the Conference on Tibet-Mongolia Relations. I'm honored to be here today among the distinguished scholars and esteemed audience. First of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the Lhadon Foundation, the Tibet Policy Institute, and Tibet Culture and Information Center, Russia, respectively directed by Tedros Kurumbuche and Gushab Dawatserenla, and the staff members of Lhadon Foundation and Tibet Policy Institute for initiating and facilitating this gathering of distinguished scholars to discuss Tibet-Mongol relations over the last 100 years. So the religious-political alliances between Mongol Hans and Tibetan Lamas in the 13th century intensified a significant cultural domain, which we may call the Tibetan Buddhist cultural zone. This cultural zone covered vast territories ranging from Himalayas to Siberia and was characterized by the spread of Tibetan Buddhism or Nalanda tradition, associated cultural practices. Notably, within this expansive region, the dominance and impact of Gelug school and the institution of the Dalai Lama have been undeniably significant, particularly in the Mongolian culture areas, Inner Mongolia, 3 Buddhist republics of Soviet Union, and sovereign state of Mongolia. So we can here see the blue line is actually showing the Mongolian culture area, and the yellow line shows the Nalanda tradition. So before I go into the talk, I would like to show one slide about where the Mongolia. So we can see the religious geography of Mongolia. Mongolia actually locates just at the center of the Buddhist world, and we have Muslim expansion coming from west, and as well as Christian expansions also happening in Mongolia. Regarding the last 100 years, from the historical perspective of Mongolia, Tibetan-Mongolian relations have undergone 3 distinct phases. From 1900 to 1921, from 1921 to 1990, and from 1990 to the present. During this period, the 13th Dalai Lama, Nawan Losang Gyatso, and the 14th Dalai Lama visited Mongolia. Unfortunately, when they visited Mongolia, both the Dalai Lamas were in exile and seeking support from Tsarist Russia and the Soviet Union. In this pursuit, Mongolia was a facilitator and a platform for addressing Tibetan issues on the international stage. His Holiness the Dalai Lama has visited Mongolia 9 times since 1979, with his most recent visit in 2016. His first 2 visits coincided with Mongolia's socialist era, marked by state's adoption of Marxist-Leninist ideology as it is guiding principle. Subsequently, his following 7 visits took place during Mongolia's transitional period towards democracy and the free market economy. So in this presentation, I will briefly discuss His Holiness the Dalai Lama's first and last visits to Mongolia, examining on their religious-political significance related to Tibeto-Mongolian relations and the political impact, religion, and potential impact on the next reincarnation of the Dalai Lama. So before 1979, the year of His Holiness Dalai Lama's first visit to Mongolia, the Mongols from the Mongolian People's Republic first met him in 1956 in India during the 2500th anniversary of the Buddha's birth, also known as Buddha Jayanti, hosted by the Indian government. According to the report submitted by the 2 Mongolian delegates, Gombo-Idshin, a disciplinary monk of Gombo-Idshin Monastery, and the Shadwing Losomwandang, a lecturer at the Mongol National University, Mongolian delegates met the Dalai Lama and the 10th Panchen Lama Tenla Lhadon Gyentse during a dinner reception hosted by the Chinese embassy in Delhi on November 26, 1956. 3 Buryat Mongolian Buddhist delegates from the Soviet Union were also present at the dinner reception as per the report. So we will see the 2 Mongolian delegates greeting the His Holiness Dalai Lama and the Panchen His Holiness Dalai Lama here. So in this, it is well known that His Holiness Dalai Lama's first visit to Soviet Union and Mongolia was facilitated by the Asian Buddhist Conference for Peace, ABCP, an international Buddhist organization. The ABCP was founded in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia in 1970 during the Cold War. This was a time when the world was divided between the capitalist bloc led by the United States and the socialist bloc led by the Soviet Union. Additionally, this period was marked by Sino-Soviet split. So in this international scenario, we can understand the objectives and activities of the ABCP. Even though the ABCP was primarily promoting Soviet foreign policy to extend its influence over non-aligned Asian Buddhist countries and counterbalancing the U.S. activities in this regard, Gombo-Idshin Monastery, the Buddhist center in Mongolia, headed by the Mongolian Khambu Lamas, Kembu Lamas, were maximizing the situation into a favorable opportunity to restore Buddhism in Mongolia. It was something like trying to turn poison into a nectar. In my opinion, the wise abbots of Gombo-Idshin Monastery skillfully applied Mahayana Buddhist conception of skillful means, tablakeva, impermanence, medagba, and interdependence, and dinjindaba, in dealing with the circumstances prevalent in the socialist period. So we'll see here like the first meeting of the ABCP in 1970. The Dalai Lama's 1979 visit to Mongolia as an honored guest at the 5th General Conference of the ABCP paved the way for the Tibetan government in exile to address Tibetan issues on the international stage using the ABCP as an effective platform. It is noteworthy that following the Dalai Lama's visit to the Soviet Union and Mongolia, the USA granted him a visa to enter the country. A year after His Holiness Dalai Lama's visit to Mongolia, the Council for Religious and Culture Affairs, CRCA, Chörg Lekung, of the Dalai Lama joined the ABCP in 1980. Regarding Tibetan participation in the 5th General Conference of the ABCP, Nawang Gilig Rinpoche, the director of the Tibet House, remarked that, quotation, the Tibetans would not forget their historic participation, end of quote. The 6th General Conference of the ABCP was organized again in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia in 1982. The Chörg Lekung of the Dalai Lama attended the 6th General Conference, and the representative of the CRCA of the Dalai Lama emphasized in his speech that, we can see it, it's quite small. Okay, quotation. The 5th General Conference of the ABCP was a landmark in the history of Mongol-Tibet relationship as it brought forth the resumption of the close cultural and religious ties that existed between the Tibet and Mongolia prior to the forceful Chinese occupation of Tibet. As it is the aims and objectives of the ABCP to oppose imperialism, colonialism, and neo-colonialism, and to uphold and defend national independence as a basic requirement for lasting peace, we Tibetans would like to take this opportunity to appeal to all those who genuinely cherish the above objectives not to forget the plight of the 6 million Tibetan people in Tibet whose basic human rights and national independence have been deprived by China. The Tibetan national independence is also crucial to world peace, and it would be a grave mistake if it's regarded otherwise. End of the quote. At the 6th General Conference, Khamdul Rinpoche Jamyang Drunrup, the General Secretary of the CRCA, was elected to the Executive Council of the ABCP. After the Dalai Lama's first visit to Mongolia in 1979, the quarterly English journal of the ABCP, Buddhists for Peace, started to publish news about Tibetans in exile, the Dalai Lama's visits to Mongolia and the Soviet Union, and exclusive interviews with His Holiness Dalai Lama and Kyawang Samdeng Rinpoche. By 1983, the journal had been circulated to 530 addresses across 104 countries. During his second visit to Mongolia in 1982, the Dalai Lama restored the historical spiritual bond between the Dalai Lamas and the Mongols by bestowing a Yamantaka empowerment at the Ganden-Tikchen monastery. We know that Tantric empowerment empowers receivers to step into secret Tantric practice, and at the same time immediately empowers the bestower to impose his spiritual authority over receivers in the role of Vajra Guru. According to Tantric practice, once an individual receives empowerment, it's utmost important to follow the Vajra Guru's advice and keep samyas purely to attain siddhis and realization. The recent empowerment given by His Holiness the Dalai Lama to the Mongols was Chakrasambar environment in Krishnacharya lineage on March 8, 2023. On the day of the preparation stage, Dagong of the empowerment, His Holiness told the large gathering of the attendants, which included 600 Mongolian Buddhists and the 5,000 monastics, that, quotation, we have the reincarnation of Lkhagyademchig Rinpoche of Mongolia with us today. His predecessors had a close association with the Krishnacharya lineage of Chakrasambar. One of them established a monastery in Mongolia dedicated to its practice. So his being here today is quite auspicious, end of quotation. It was the first public appearance of the 10th Tsedendamba Hotukto, Tenzin Jambal Chugi Wanchuk. So we are here, so it is the 10th Tsedendamba Hotukto here. The His Holiness Dalai Lama's last visit to in 2016 was primarily connected to the reincarnation of the 9th Tsedendamba Hotukto, Jambal Namda Chugi Gentsen. On November 23, 2016, on the morning of his departure from Mongolia, the Dalai Lama presided over the press conference. At the press conference, His Holiness announced that the 10th Tsedendamba Hotukto was born in Mongolia. He said that, quotation, there is a sign that indicates the reincarnation of the ninth Jadamba was born in Mongolia. But since a child is now an infant, it is unnecessary to make a public announcement hurriedly. It is very clear that the reincarnations now in Mongolia. Things will get clearer after some years. The Dalai Lama's previous visit to Mongolia in 2011 also relates to the issue of the reincarnation of the ninth Tsedendamba. At that time, his visit took place after 5 days when the ninth Tsedendamba was enthroned as the head of Mongolian Buddhism at the Gombo-Idshin monastery, the center of Mongolian Buddhists. In his enthronement ceremony, abbots of all major Mongol monasteries, members of the Mongolian parliament, and the foreign dignitaries such as Shri Saptar Singh, Indian ambassador to Mongolia, attended. The enthronement ceremony was held on the day of 2nd of November 2011, and the Dalai Lama visited Mongolia on November 7. On the morning of November 8, the Dalai Lama met Tsedendamba and suggested him that it is now important to consider his next reincarnation being born in Mongolia. To the administrative monk officials of the Gombo-Idshin monastery, His Holiness addressed that, quotation, "There is a special relationship between reincarnations of the Dalai Lama and of the Tsedendamba. I'm younger than him. I'll be in charge of the next reincarnation." The end of quotation. It can be concluded that the Dalai Lama's last two visits to Mongolia in 2011 and 2016 were clearly related to the reincarnation of the ninth Tsedendamba. Furthermore, these visits can also be interpreted as being connected to the issue of the Dalai Lama's own reincarnation. Moreover, the recent event shows that the ABCP, an esteemed international Buddhist organization that enjoys the UNESCO roster consultative status, could play a potential role in the issue of the successor or reincarnation of the Dalai Lama. During the 12th ABCP General Conference held on January 17 to 18 of this year in New Delhi, India, the ABCP issued a statement related to the next reincarnation of the Dalai Lama. The ABCP statement declared His Holiness the Dalai Lama as a universal supreme leader of the Buddhist world, and furthermore, it emphasized that, quotation, "No government nor any individual has the right to interfere," end of quotation, in the next reincarnation of the Dalai Lama. This statement delivers the ABCP's full support for the Dalai Lama's statement on his next reincarnation issued on September 24, 2011, and shares the same spirit with the Tibetan Policy and Support Act legislation passed by the U.S. Congress and signed by President Donald Trump on December 27, 2020. Concerning the next reincarnation of the Dalai Lama, we see this contentious scenario now. China claims that the ultimate authority for selecting the next Dalai Lama is the central government of People's Republic of China. With this objective, China has its legislation titled The Regulation on Management Measures of the Reincarnations of Living Buddhas in Tibetan Buddhism. Issued on July 18, 2007. Furthermore, China claims its authority by possessing the 11th Panchen Lama Gyaltsen Norbu and the Golden Urn method for selecting the next Dalai Lama. In counterposition, the Tibetan community side stands firmly holding into His Holiness the Dalai Lama's statement regarding his reincarnation, supported by legal backing from the USA through the Tibetan Policy and Support Act and support from like-minded members of the international community. In this competitive context, there is a potential involvement of the ABCP, an international Buddhist organization with the UNESCO Roster Consultative status, headquartered in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, and the 10th Tsedendamba, who is recognized by His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the succession or reincarnation of the Dalai Lama. In conclusion, His Holiness the Dalai Lama's initial visits to Mongolia have been instrumental in revitalizing Tibet-Mongol relations in the modern era. In particular, through these visits, he has strengthened centuries-old spiritual ties between the Dalai Lama and the Mongols. Moreover, his visits have provided the Tibetan community in exile with the opportunity to address Tibetan issues on an international stage using the platform of the ABCP. The last two visits of His Holiness Dalai Lama resulted in the recognition of the Tenzin who holds the highest position as the Buddhist leader of Mongolia and the Mongolian cultural regions. Despite having a physical border with China and Russia, Mongolia borders those countries and people with whom we share our common cherished values, such as Buddhism and democracy. These values extend to Tibet-Mongol relations as well. Our Prime Minister Oyurdin said, "Mongolia is landlocked, but not mind-locked," during his state visit to the United States. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm again expressing my sincere gratitude to Dila Hotuk Foundation, the Tibet Policy Institute, and Tibet Culture and Information Center Russia for organizing and facilitating this conference on the Tibet-Mongol relations. And for your information, last September, Mongolia hosted the Pope Francis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jadamba, for finishing your presentation right on time. Also, it is extremely interesting how you made presentation on the detailed accounts and analysis of His Holiness Dalai Lama's visit to Mongolia and the religious political significance it holds. Moving on to our third speaker, let me welcome Professor Batbayar Tenzin, who is the director of the Institute of Language and Literature at the Mongolian Academy of Sciences. He will be speaking on the traditions and contemporary issues of Tibetan literary studies at the Mongolian Academy of Sciences. Professor, you have the stage.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone here, a distinguished guest. And I'm very happy to visit India and Dharamsala here for first time. And also Tibet Policy Institute, Central Tibetan Administration, and the Lhadon Foundation, Mongolia. We're given the opportunity to participate in this conference. I'm not Tibetologist, but I'm happy to briefly introduce part of Tibetan studies at the Mongolian Academy of Sciences, and our academy has a total of 16 institutes, one of which Institute of Language and Literature, which has a history of over 100 years. The president of Mongolian Academy of Sciences academician Dur Irgdil mentioned in the introduction to the work History of the Sciences of Mongolia, said our Mongolian ancestors have been centralizing and developing their state for hundreds of years. They left to us today a wonderful tradition of valuing the power of the science and valuing and honoring scientists and sages. This part of the memorial of many centuries of written and cultures inevitably connected with Tibetan studies, Tibetan literacy, Tibetan language and literature. Tibetan studies is an important field of the research that inevitably related to Mongolian studies. However, we should not forget that in the center we study literature, language, literacy, and culture rather than politics and economics. However, other institutes conduct a lot of research, many research related to the Tibetan history,
culture and foreign relations. For example, academician Batbayar, whose speech was discussed yesterday and today, works at the Institute of History and Ethnography, and Professor Batsekhan works at the Institute of International Studies. The Tibetan language has a history of being an intellectual creation language of the Mongolian scribes. That is why Mongolian science, including literary studies, has developed a concept called Tibetan literature into scientific field. About this in the fourth volume of the History of Mongolia, tied to the spread of the religion of God, Mongolia through Tibet in Tibetan language, become widespread among the Mongolians in 18th to 19th centuries, and then become the language of religion and workshop for all Mongolians, as well as the language of knowledge, performed and writing of scholars wrote about philosophy, astrology, music, proper dialect, medicine and history, and our expression of the state of knowledge spiritually and the world view of Mongolia at that time concluded. In the history of Mongolian language and written among the learned monks and great writers who wrote works in the Tibetan language, we can mention that High Saint Zanabazar and his students Lobson Danzan Jansang, First Darba Vandita Lobson Sotov Jamts, Khalkhin Zai Bandita Lobson Perinle, and Sumb about the exposure of the Blue Lake, Agwan Dandar, Tharam of Alsha, Zakharkips Lobson Chultum, Sembil Guyush, Dharmapata, Dandar, Agram, and Jamingaro can be named. That is why from the time when the Scriptural Institute was first established in 1921, the Scriptural Book Institute that named, which became the first scientific institution of Mongolia under the authority of the Ministry of State by the people, government decree, had Tibetan Studies Department from the first time it was established. That the Tibetan Studies Department was headed by famous Soviet scientist. It was led by M.I. Tobiansky. Since the inception, Scriptural Institute has focused on literature and the central language as Tibetan language, and can be seen from the Institute first resolution. For example, in the resolution of the first meeting of the Institute in 1921, first article says, don't respect the main language of Mongolia, and the second article says, let's make it too easy for the people to learn translating the books of the Tsanit, that means philosophy, a degree from the Tibetan language into Mongolian. When discussing the matter, it was decided to invite Zawad Emding, the scholar, taught. The Encyclopedia of Mongolian Soyumba literature states in the development of the Mongolian culture and cultural heritage created by the language of the Mongolians occupies an important place. To the spirit of the religion of God, Mongolia, learned Mongolian monks created books, a wide range of culture and sciences, such as history, culture, language, literature, philosophy, medicine, astrology, astronomy, etc., contributed greatly to the intellectual development of it concluded. Tenzin Damdinsurung, the Mongolian, a well-known scientist who established the Department of Tibetan Literature Studies at the Institute of Language and Literature of Mongolian Academy of Science, said there are thousands of the cultural gems that have followed from the valley of the Gang River to the high mountains of the snowy Himalayas to steppe of the Mongolia. It was called metaphorically because of the closeness of Mongolian cultural relations of in the Tibetan studies. The Mongolian government and science have been paying attention to the research in the Tibetan, which has been carrying the rich knowledge and heritage of traditional Oriental sciences since its foundation in the Institute of Scripture, Jadamba, Lkhagyademchig, Shagj Givsh, Bishrit Gombo, Agrum, and Darba Bandita, and Awan Chonjin Dondo were appointed to the institute. Highly educated Buddhist scholars were working at this time. Renowned scientist Professor Hurlwater discussed the tradition of Mongols written in the Mongolian language. Even the 11th century, when Chogyotzer wrote book The 12 Acts of the God in the Mongolian language and translated into Mongolian by the famous translator Sharvsingh, can be said. But the last 200 years or second half of the 16th century, when the Gelugwag direction of the Buddhism spread strongly in Mongolia, is considered as main period. So far, we have discovered more than 200 authors have been written in the Tibetan language, said. In this order, to the review centuries-old history of language, literature, and center in Tibetan studies, Mongolian science reviewed the tradition in the 1981 under the initiative Lkhagyademchig. It focuses on the study of Mongolian history, culture, literature, custom, philosophy, medicine, and astrology through scriptures. Due to political situation at that time, it could not be called Tibetan studies. So Lkhagyademchig gave name it the Department of Tibetan Literary Studies. And during these years, Dr. Somya highlighted the contribution and research work of scholars in the field. In Tibetan literature, research of senior scholars beyond the boundaries of Mongolian literary studies and included Oriental studies, ancient Indian studies, and Tibetan studies as well. There is this quality to research works at senior scientists as Tenzin, Tserin Sotnum, Altangir, Liandong, Hurlwater have made their contribution to world science and once occupied their position. For example, Tenzin research work review of Mongolian literature systematically studied of cultural relation of India, Tibet, and Mongolia, and will be the basis of the methodology of linguistics, literature, and documentary research. In the future, it becomes concluded. Also, our department had department called Modern Language Library and Laboratory has almost 10,000 Tibetan scriptures and more than 7,000 Tibetan scriptures sutras stored in the Thot script, Clear script, and Mongolian script altogether. Among them, the Mongolian and Thot books have been digitally made available to readers, while the books in the Tibetan have not been digitized. Also, in the home museum of the famous Mongolian scholar Tenzin, which belongs to our institute, there are almost 3,000 Mongolian sutras. The bibliographic records of this have been published by researchers Nyam Megmor, Somya, Munksaya, Nyamachir, Tsendina, Munkatong, and Bilgude. Also, since 2021, the Tibetan language literary studies branch sector has changed its name to the Tibetan and Source Studies sector, and since 2012. The journal, also Tibet Studies, has been published. In recent years, major works have been published at the center, such as collaborate work, Mongolian Dictionary, at center, the land of sages, textile studies, prose, and Mungo Ton's kind that reveals time have been published. In Ph.D. You can see that some of recent publications now. Then some of publications I handed yesterday to the library of institute. And conclusion, brief conclusion maybe. This importance of the Tibetan studies, including Tibetan language literary studies, which is being developed at the Institute of Language and Literature of Mongolian Academy of Sciences, can be assessed from the many angles. And Dr. Somya concluded about this by saying, today in this area of globalization, Buddhist studies and Tibetan studies, researchers all over the world, that the time has come to exchange methods and experience learned from the great heritage of the human intellectual culture and the achievements of the creative thinking. In this way, the literature and science created by Central Asian nomads, Tibetans, and Mongolians will be undoubtedly further clarify the unique creative contribution to the intellectual culture and artistic thinking of the mankind, said. And that's all my paper, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor, for that very, interesting presentation, enlightening us with the less explored yet very important subjects like how Tibetan literary studies were established in Mongolia and how, what kind of intellectual culture has that contributed to in Mongolia. Well, this has been a great panel discussion, and it was a delight for me to chair this session and listening to all your great presentation. For this, let me extend my deepest gratitude to all the three speakers, Professor Batbayar Tsedendamba, Dr. Lkhagyademchig Jadamba, and Professor Bat Iradui Tenzin. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to the audience for your patience and for your participation. Thank you.